Spin me a dream woven silver and gold, from sunshine and shadows and days long ago, where people are memories and stories unfold.
Greetings, Uncle Travelling Matt here, and I'm reporting on my third day of walking St. Frideswides Way from Oxford to Reading. And it's several months have passed since my last video. It is now February, and my personal circumstances have changed considerably in that I am now no longer living with my mum and caring for her. It got very intense. That's one of the reasons why I didn't walk before now. My brain just didn't have any, well, I didn't have any time to go off walking, but my brain didn't have time for anything. But 3 weeks ago, we put my mum in a home. She declined very, very rapidly to the point that things like toilet, things like dressing, eating, everything was a problem. And she just was becoming neglected, even though I was there. She wanted my attention like all the times. I couldn't do any work. So she is now in a home. She's much happier there. I think it was much harder for me and my brother than her going in the home, but that's that. And I had a week off work where I sort of started to get my head straight, and then I've been catching up with life, and I realised that I needed another little Camino. So I returned and back to the path. Not without misgivings. And the main misgiving was that although the day was dry and lovely, well, not lovely, overcast, but dry, almost continually since Christmas, it's been throwing it down. And so the mud that, cut me short on the first couple of days, I thought, all right, is that going to be a problem again? And that was my main thought as I parked up in Culham and walked down to from the centre of the village to the river and to start my way. And I got to the river, and the river was pretty swollen, I've got to admit. So I thought, okay, it's not good, but maybe we're passable. And I started walking, and after 20 minutes, I encountered a deep puddle. And couldn't get around it. It was marshy on either side, so I thought, I've got to go through this. So I waded through this puddle. I hitched my jeans up and got my feet wet, but I thought, well, they'll dry as I walk along, and I'm not going to be put off that easily. And I continued for about another quarter of a mile, and then there was a much deeper and larger puddle. And then beyond that, the path just disappeared into the vast lake that the overflowing Thames had become. And so I thought, right, okay, I've got to rethink this. And as I stood there, I thought, well, I've got three options. The first one is to give up, which I didn't want to do, although I do like the Pitt Rivers Museum, and I could have spent the day mooching around in the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. I think every time we attempt something and fail, you sort of plant an acorn of self-doubt in your mind, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to succeed somehow. The second option was to plough ahead regardless, but I would have had to swim to Wallingford. I mean, it was that bad, and actually quite dangerous, I think. So the third way was to find an alternative route. So I actually scrambled up the bank onto a field and made my way back to the road, and then took a route along the roads. And I didn't want to do that because when I was in Italy, I'd had to cover several sections walking by a sort of main road, and there was all the traffic going by, and you can never truly relax because it is. I mean, I think people overstate the danger, but there is a danger, and you've just got to be alert all the time. And partly what I like about walking is like losing yourself in the meditation. And so I thought, I don't want to spend a day where I'm basically fighting traffic all day. There's no fun in that. But actually, the Lord moves in mysterious ways. And when I got to the A road, there was a wide tarmac pavement. And basically, for the rest of the day, I didn't have to fight traffic at all. There was a pavement all the way. And so I walked onwards. And as I did, I had some really quite intensive musings, and actually probably walking along the road was better than walking by the river, because there I would have always been having to look my way and, wade through puddles and all this and this. I could just walk at a decent pace, get a rhythm, and lose myself in the meditations. And having gone down to the river at first, it gave me something to think about. And you may remember that in the first section of my walk, I kept thinking about Philip Pullman's trilogy of books, the Book of Dust, which is, so you've got his Dark Materials, which is the books about Lyra Belacqua, and it's about parallel universes. It's very good. And then the Book of Dust, you've got La Belle Sauvage, which particularly was stuck in my mind, because that's a prequel, and the baby Lyra, his escort, like she's in danger. So they go from Godstow Abbey and the Trout Inn at Godstow, which is that's north of Oxford by the Thames, and she's taken in this boat called La Belle Sauvage along the Thames to London, and ultimately that's how she becomes safe. And so it's a story about a journey along the Thames, which fits. And so after I'd done my walk, I thought I'd reread it. I couldn't find it, but I did find the second one in the trilogy, which is A Secret Commonwealth, which also includes a trip and a boat along the Thames. And so I reread that. And then I read the third book in the trilogy, The Rosefield. And rereading the book reminded me that in the first one, they... a lot of the story, it's interesting because Pullman I think he's an atheist. He's certainly not religious, and he was involved I think he still is involved in the Humanist Society, but it's a deeply spiritual set of books. And this Secret Commonwealth, from which the second book gets its title, is this world around our own world that is there, but we don't always perceive it. So the natural world, or, forces beyond our comprehension are giving us messages. And some people recognize them, but most people, in our busy modern life, either choose not to or just do not recognize these messages. And that, to me, is very pertinent, because in the last few years, ever since I walked to Camino de Santiago, I've been kind of opening myself up to... trusting my intuition more, and trusting messages and chance coincidences and stuff like that. And I've written things about it, but and so, and I found it's really given me benefits. And when I've gone with my gut instinct on stuff and advised people on things, it's always, come true, sort of thing. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And in the La Belle Sauvage book, they actually almost see the river as a goddess, which of course, in ancient pagan religions and in other religions today, like Hinduism, rivers are goddesses. And in one point, they meet the River Thames personified as a goddess. And when I was standing by that flooded path, that notion of the river as a goddess, which had never made sense to me before, it made sense. Because it was almost like the goddess speaking to me, and she was saying, Luke, I don't want your company now. Come back in the summer, and you can walk by my side, and you can paddle in my body, all you like. I'll be your friend then, but now, I don't want you near me. Go away. I'm busy. And I got the feeling of a mother protecting her children, because this is springtime, it's a time of rebirth, and she wanted humans to keep away because she's pregnant, And of course, she literally is pregnant. I mean, massively wide with all the floods. And it's a bit like that, the bird who sits on her nest protecting her eggs. And she's like, tweeting at you. And like, look, I've warned you once, the puddle, right? You didn't listen. I'm warning you again now more seriously. You continue on and I will hurt you. And that was the first time in my life I've understood this concept of a river as a goddess. I mean, when I was in India, I went to Varanasi. Obviously, the river Ganges is the goddess, and I witnessed the arti ceremonies, which are, honouring her every evening. And I found there was something so powerful, so primeval in them. But this is the first time I've understood it in a British context. And that gave me a lot to think about. But, being able to hear those messages from the natural world, and whether we personify them as goddesses or not, it doesn't really matter, they're still there. And actually respects the natural world, because our ancestors would have said, right, yeah, for this month or two, you cannot walk by the river and that's it. Whereas in our age, we want to do what we want to do, and we want everything on our terms, and reality doesn't always matter. It's what I want to be this, or I want to do this, and so I am going to do it, and that's that. And the power of nature is often hidden from us, in that, I'd crossed the Thames multiple times. I hadn't realised how flooded it was, because our bridges are high in concrete and, it doesn't disturb our lives these days. But back in medieval times it would have done, and I thought that was interesting. I also got thinking of a friend of mine called, I'll call her Sara. It's not her real name. And Sara, basically, a wonderful girl from a rather strict conservative religious background, but she was engaged to be married to a guy. It was an arranged marriage. I don't think she was particularly into him, but then it all fell through because he fell in love with someone else and married her. And to get over it, Sarah went on holiday, and when she went on holiday, I would say her eyes were opened as to the world. She saw that there was something else out there beyond what she'd always been told. She also had a holiday romance, and I think she experienced love for the first time. And then she came back, and ever since, I think she's been trying to process that experience. What does it mean? Because in her culture, to have a romantic relationship with somebody who is, not a member of your faith, it's not okay by your parents and all that, it's actually shameful, it's sinful, it's wrong, and yet it felt so right to her. And I think she'd always expected that if she did something that was so wrong, it would somehow feel wrong. That, like, for example, if I robbed a bank, and I might like having all that money, and it can be great because I could spend all that money on X, Y, and Z, but I know in my heart of hearts it's immoral. Whereas, this actually felt to her like it was what God wanted her to do, but at the same time, that doesn't square with what her community and her faith had always told her. And so that either means that, she can't trust her gut instinct, or she can't trust her community, either of which has a big effect. I mean, that's a mental bind to be in. And so what she did, to try and deal with it, is she married somebody else that was found for her by the community, and because she thought, well, I guess if the haram is fun, then the halal will be even more fun, and it wasn't. I mean, he's not a bad guy. I mean, I can't say lobble along quite well, but she's not in love with him, and it's not much of a relationship, and now she's having to come to terms with that because she's stuck, like I was by the river. She cannot go forward because, the eddies are swirling, and it would mean diving in. It would mean, the river in her case is her community or her religion, and it would mean revealing, her true nature to them, and that actually could be dangerous. Honor killings are a thing, and life isn't a holiday romance. So the alternative is, well, okay, you turn back, you give up on your dreams, you give up on what you want from life, and you settle down with this person you're not really into, and have a You know, that's like me in the Pit Rivers. Pit Rivers would have been great, but it's not what I was there to do. It's not my purpose. It's not my destiny. And ultimately, you know, those acorns of self-doubt and failure can grow into a forest that can choke you. Or she has to look for another path. And I guess my message, or the message that I received was, well, if you're brave enough to look for another path that can satisfy your community and satisfy your dreams, and I think there is always a third path, then actually you'll find that when you go on it, a lot of your fears about it, so my fear about, like, you know, battling the traffic, are not realised because there was a pavement. So, I don't know. I don't know how Sara's story will end, but it's her story, it's not mine, but it got me thinking about that. And I walked to a village called Cliftonhampton, one of these heartbreakingly pretty villages, you know, thatched cottages and all that. And I went to the bridge. George Gilbert Scott designed the bridge there and stood on the bridge and sort of made a silent prayer to the goddess Thames. And then I went to the church, which was an ancient one, but I think it was dedicated to St. Mary, I think. No, St. Michael and All Angels. An ancient one, but largely rebuilt by George Gilbert Scott. So very pretty. It's on a cliff, hence the name Cliftonhampton, above the river. And I prayed in there, and I lit incense and a candle before the statue of Our Lady, which was quite nice. It was she was in a little niche in a window, and behind her was the river flowing, and it almost felt like she was the goddess Thames. And of course, maybe she is. The divine feminine has many faces, right? And then I moved on, and I walked on another mile or two, and I was getting hungry, and I came across a pub. It advertised itself as a gastro pub, one of the finest gastro pubs in the country, and it was called the Checkers, I think. It was a beautiful old building, and the food was great. I had a French onion soup, but the prices were very high. And as I continued walking on, the pub thing, the pub thing got me thinking. I'm gonna muse on that later because otherwise this video would dead long. Walked to a place called Dorchester, which is not the famous Dorchester. It's another one, Dorchester on Thames, and it's it's not a very big village, but it's got this enormous church, which was an abbey before Dorchester Abbey. I mean, it literally is the size of a cathedral because once upon a time it was a cathedral. And it's very, very important in English Christian history because in, I think it was 634, Pope Honorius first or second, I forget which one, he tasked a guy called Birinus to evangelize the West Saxons. Now, of course, Christianity was already established in our Isles, but it was more in Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and the north of England, and south of England less so. St. Augustine had been plonked in Canterbury, hence why Canterbury Cathedral is so important, but this was to kind of go towards the southwest. And this guy came over, he landed at Southampton, and then did the journey I'm going to be doing in reverse, up to Reading, and then settled, made his see in Dorchester. And at one point, it covered, the bishopric covered like all of England up to the Humber. And later, after he died, he was buried there, although they say his remains were moved to Winchester when the bishopric was moved to Winchester Cathedral, but there is still a shrine for him in there. Now the shrine's a rebuild, but there were two claims as to where his relics were. And so I went to the shrine of St. Birinus and lit a candle and incense and prayed there, and then moved on. And carried on over the River Tame, which is a tributary of the Thames, also flooded, to a village called Shillingford, where I tried to go through the village on the quieter road, but that was flooded as well, so I had to stick on the main roads. And then about a mile or so after there, I stopped at Shillingford Bridge, a magnetic bridge over the Thames, and there's a up there, so I had a cup of tea there, did a bit of reading, and then walked the last mile or two into Wallingford, another of those really pretty little towns. It reminded me a lot of Abingdon, actually. And that's where, as the sun was setting, I ended my walk for the day in the market square, where the buses pull up to take me back to Culham. So that was my second day of walking St. Frideswide's Way. Halfway along now. Should have taken 2 days, has taken 3. But that's me, Uncle Travelling Matt saying, travelling.
The wind in the willows sang softly to me. Follow my